in her words, Working Conversations by Women. I'm your host, Thando Mazibuko. Today we're talking about a truth that so many women carry but rarely name. You can be told you're too much, not enough, and sometimes still find your home to yourself. Our guest is Blair Sorrel, author, innovator, and survivor. Her memoir, A Schizoid at Smith, is a recursive, hilarious look at growing up with schizoid personality disorder, navigating overparenting, and finding solace in rock and roll, animals, and her own fierce voice. If you've ever felt misunderstood, labeled, or like had to shrink to fit in, this conversation is for you. Welcome, Blair, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Blair, your memoir is titled A Schizoid at Smith. How is overparenting leads to underachieving? That's such a provocative title. What first moved you to write the story? And who did you hope would read it?
Well, obviously, I wanted anybody who's struggling with feeling different, misunderstood, having difficulty focusing, relating to other people, having potential but not able to do very much with his or her life. Anybody who felt marginalized, and that can include a lot of people who may seem very neurotypical or mainstream, have always had feelings of being an outsider or polarized. There could be people who achieve, who still have extreme self-doubt. Obviously, I was skewing it toward neurodivergent people with SPD, Schizoid Personality Disorder, but it really is more inclusive because more normal people tell me that they relate and see themselves in a lot of it, of always having to battle an overbearing parents' view of what they should be doing with their life, or chronic weight issues, self-esteem, wondering where they belong or if they choose to belong, what their social mask should be, not wishing to perform socially, being more observers than participants. So that makes it relatable. Obviously, those people who don't have this disorder have more of a handle on their lives because they can focus, they can get to places on time, they are more appropriate, they have better social skills. But the message is exportable to a lot of different kinds of people. And my hope ultimately was to prevent this disorder because it can lead to homelessness. It is a form of disability. And if the signs are there and this kind of parenting ensues, it can and will imprint something that can become a lifelong handicap, in the sense the person may not be able to work and the parents may become the benefactors. So there are these repercussions living with this. It is serious. It is manageable. There are jobs where people can be more isolated, but it does have a low quality of life potential.
You touched on about parenting and, how it could be affecting, children or people with this disorder. You say that you had a complicated, unaffectionate mother and an absentee father. How did that dynamic shape your sense of self, and how did it begin to untangle in their expectations from your own identity?
Well, I think sometimes parents unwittingly put adult expectations on children. Mm-hmm. They used to be considered little adults, I think, until the 17th century. But perfectionism, unrealistic demands over directing can force a child in clinical terms into withdrawal. Withdrawal is being in fantasy, daydreaming, because think about it. What other defense would a child have from escaping from criticism? It's important to note, however, that not every schizoid is impaired, but that's what caused me to have that imprint. And my father, for all intents and purposes, was absentee. He was detached emotionally. He really wasn't committed to the marriage. We didn't really know him. So it was the combination of neglect on his part, and it could be construed as abuse on my mother's part, although it was not intended abusively. She just wanted a better iteration of herself in me. And it set up standards for which the only prospect was for me to fail. So I wouldn't attempt to do things I didn't have mastery. I could never develop confidence. Even when I got into Smith College, even when my books started getting plaudits, there's this chronic self-doubt. It's not good enough. Now, a lot of people tell me they have parents and they wouldn't want to make a business presentation in front of them because there would be something wrong with their outfit, something wrong with their vocabulary, whatever it is, that they could never uphold their standards. But those people had to have gotten confidence, had to have been able to focus somehow. So my desire was just to get to the crux of what happened. This is not meant as a vilification of my parents. At best, they were bad parents, but they weren't malfeasant. I just wanted to know, with the hope of preventing it, or at the very least trying to figure out how to get earlier intervention so people wouldn't lead the kind of life that I had, because they can plummet into homelessness. It's a harsh life. Mm-hmm. It's a dependent life. And I do know of one schizoid who lived at home through his entire life, and Adult Protective Services had to move him into assisted living. He could not, in spite of having an MBA from Fordham, he could not manage his own affairs. He was totally dependent, totally infantilized, and very susceptible, of course, to manipulators. Now there are so many more scammers online and on the phone that people with this kind of condition would be extremely vulnerable. Another thing is to consider is that if you're always keeping yourself at a distance, you probably know in your own life there are times you have to go to a doctor. Mm-hmm. You would need to see a lawyer or an accountant, or seek some kind of expert advice. What would happen if you never did that? You could doom yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's serious in the extent that it's dangerous for the schizoid to be that detached, because life is challenging and there are predators out there.
You speak about detachment and isolation. Yet you've built such an impactful and used your voice as a way of advocacy and creativity. What does thriving look like for you now? And how do you define success in your own terms?
How do I define my SPD in my own life now?
Success, yes, with SPD now that you have been diagnosed after so long.
How do I'm sorry, I'm not quite following. How do I acknowledge
How do you define success for yourself now in your journey?
Oh, how do I success?
Yes.
Success to me would be if somebody said, I read this and my son's in treatment. We didn't know what it was. If somebody said to me, I'm not super achieving, but most people don't, but I found a career path, a niche, a path that allows me to feel fulfilled. In my own community of Lawrence, it's one of the poorest in New England, there's a middle-aged man who told me last Friday that he was going to be renting a house. And this is a major achievement for him, because when I met him a decade ago, he has panic disorder, and he was volunteering, and that's all he was able to do. And that was to his credit because his days were structured and he was purposeful. Then he and his brother got jobs working at a warehouse, something blue collar. So they persevered for about the last decade. And now, because of the income he has, they're able to rent a house. He has a girlfriend. He'll be getting a car. These may seem like baby steps for most people, because most people are able to do this in their teens. But for somebody like this, it's all relative to what your emotional state is. You can have everything else, but if you don't have the emotional state, it will undermine whatever gifts you have. You can look at, I look at a really dreadful scenario, the Reiners, and I had wished that the son had gotten the kind of treatment and had adhered to it and been able to find some kind of path. Of course, he would have never achieved the way his superstar director father did, but most people don't. Europeans wonder why everybody in America has to be successful. Why can't people just do what they enjoy? So I think another part of this is you have to have the emotional state for success. In my opinion, we have a president who has mostly the emotional state and the rest. And not that much to back it up.
Yes.
And ideally, he would back off for good, in my opinion, too. I know this is not a paid political announcement by any means, but having that emotional state and belief in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, companies won't. Then, of course, this is going to be exasperated. They're not paying you to daydream. If you're always late, you're automatically dead meat. Mm-hmm. And if you don't seem to know how to make small talk or be part of the club or dress appropriately, you can see there are a lot of different parts of this. Business skills can be taught, social skills can't. So social skills are really crucial, and they're learned and they're subtle. Mm-hmm. Somebody with this kind of condition, being in his or her own little world, doesn't have social skills. So you can see the whole package is not what's going to interest corporate America. And you're going to be out the door in fairly short succession. So if that keeps happening, you'll be traumatized and you'll end up homeless. And that's why a New York City drop-in center had a 65% population of schizoids during a survey. And I suspect there are more out there who wouldn't go to a place like that this crowd showed, because the weather must have been intolerable. Mm-hmm. So it's a sad picture. Why was this MBA? Why did he end up in assisted living? Why did Adult Protective Services need to move him? He posted on Facebook that he was nearly destitute. Mm. So you can see, you may not have heard of these people. Fortunately, they're not involved in rampages. They tend to keep to themselves, but the life that they have is marginalized and self-victimizing. Not intentionally, of course. They have too much anxiety about dealing with people, so we'll avoid them, but there are definitely personal costs. And enough studies exist about the health benefits of social interaction, especially as people get older. And as you get older, you're going to be more dependent too. So if you're not willing to avail yourself of other people and services, that's deleterious. I hope that answers it.
Yes, it does. It really does. And thank you for being so clear about it. You have a great love for animals that runs deep, and it led to you to found Street Zaps to protect dogs from stray voltage. How did caring for animals become a pathway to purpose and to connection for you?
Well, it's no secret that animals love unconditionally. Mm-hmm. And they're vulnerable, as was I, and they seemed to nurture me. They were like the cats were like little mothers. And I always really loved cats. They are very nurturing. I loved animals, and I think that's true of schizoids, that they can become bonded more with animals because animals are unconditional love, so there's no secret. And then I became aware of a problem on New York City streets and started reading about other incidents. And nobody was saying anything about tampered equipment, and the infrastructure was deteriorating, so I started doing my own outreach. And one of my flyers ended up as part of the Petropolis exhibit in the New York Historical Society show some years ago. And another ended up in the New York Press's Best Homegrown Public Service announcement. And then I had a website, I kept it up for as long as I could. I was invited to Con Edison's conference. And in the aftermath of my own grassroots and primitive efforts, they started including public service in their bill enclosures about outdoor electrical hazards. So it did have an impact on what they were doing. And of course, they had the muscle and means to do it much more effectively. But it was gratifying for me to do that. A lot of what I did that I enjoyed, ironically, had social purpose, like being a matchmaker, like doing apheresis, recruitment, and this campaign. The book is meant as public service. I mean, I don't think most people want to come forward and say they live with anything because the public, as much as they say they're open-minded on a personal level, I don't know how really open-minded they are. You risk ostracism and fear by saying that you have any kind of condition.
You touched on your unconventional career path from being a columnist and a matchmaker, blood service recruiter, and an innovator. How did living with SDP shape you to approach work? And what advice would you give others who don't fit the traditional mold? I think a lot of people try to fit the traditional mold, even neurotypical people, but a lot of us don't.
Well, I think that you have to come to terms that not everybody is a corporate person, whether or not he or she is impaired. And think about how many great innovators there are in the world who went off and did their own thing and enriched our world because they had the focus and the drive. They had to have, in a sense, apprenticed in a corporate environment. However, they had to have learned skills. Nobody just really starts by going off on their own, I don't think. They, I'm sure, had more social skills and definitely more focus and drive. I did try, but I saw that it was an exercise in futility, and I was traumatized having gone through it so much. But I kept volunteering. And that's what I would say. That's just the example of the man that I gave with panic disorder, who was volunteering but able to find a job that paid decently, that he was able to hold for a number of years. And really, I was happy to tell him the other day, look how far you've come. And that may not seem like a big achievement for somebody coming out of, prestigious college, but it is for him. It's all relative. I wrote a piece about the Reiner tragedy and being a middle child and having people ask me if what he has is what I have, which it isn't. But it's very, very sad to me that he really didn't have to work for a living. He didn't have to be rivalrous with his father. There could have been some kind of path there. And had he been able to do something, structure his day, and been less self-absorbed and seething, he would have given his parents the greatest gift, peace of mind, and allowing them to live out their final years than the way that tragedy played out. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm a cleaning lady and I absolutely love it. Or doing whatever you do that pays the bills. It's not your total identity. Most of the time, people don't even ask. I was so involved with animals and volunteering. I don't think they really knew what I did, but if they needed a helping hand, I was there. So they could rely on me. They knew that I wrote, or they'd ask me to write something. It was a hodgepodge, but given the set of circumstances, what may have been the best I could do. And when I compare myself with Nick Reiner, it's a lot better than he was able to do. You know, the trick in life is to take anything bad and turn it into something good. And so I felt the best use of what happened to me in childhood and the kind of stage it's set was to unstage it for other people, if at all possible, realizing that this kind of parenting, well-intentioned though it may be, can force your child into withdrawal, can cause lifelong attention span problems, social anxiety, lack of confidence that will become, that will doom any prospect of achievement. It will have diametrically opposed results. I saw it in myself. I saw it in the man in Ardsley who lived at home his entire life. Who couldn't manage, who down spiraled after his parents died, and who is, you know, you don't expect an MBA to have to avail themselves of adult protective services to vacate their parents' home. Mm-hmm. You don't expect a Smith graduate to be going to VESID, the Vocational Educational Services, or a disability office for guidance, but that's how it can play out. Or worse, if my father hadn't been able to help me with my rent, I could have been one of those people sleeping in front of a church. You know, people's lives don't always follow, and has nothing to do with their IQ, vocabulary, privileged background. The emotional state and being able to focus and having decent social skills, I mean, having a sense of what's appropriate, are the linchpin. They really outweigh any of the other things.
You spoke about the support you yourself got from your father. How can parents, educators, or friends support someone who's struggling to connect, or who possibly may think they do have SDP?
Well, I would seek outside guidance. I mean, there is much more. I wouldn't take matters into my own hands and do the kids' homework, which is what my mother did.
Yeah.
That totally undermined my confidence. And it wasn't maliciously intended. Don't forget, too, that we're going back many years. And now there is more transparency about all sorts of disorders. What my hope is, you know, reading and seeing if you see any of this in your kid or yourself, and saying, you know, there's nothing wrong with me. I happen to be struggling with a condition, a maladaptation. It was the only way I could adapt to overwhelming criticism as a child. So I went into fantasy, and it stuck. It stuck when I was in school and when I was in jobs. But then you could also look at the bigger picture. This person could not become a CEO, CFO, or whatever. Mm-hmm. But look, person was able to write a book, person was able to do community service work, make other kinds of inroads, have some kind of purpose. And even if I did all of that voluntarily, I never harmed anyone. Mm-hmm. You know, there are people's lives, they told me how much I helped them. I wasn't close to them, but in fact, I did help them. Mm-hmm. So there is gratification in knowing that you've made a difference in somebody else's day. And that will ultimately make a difference in yours, because you'll become less self-absorbed, and you'll have more of a perspective that I may have SPD, but somebody over there is terminally ill. Sure. You know, who's fighting the bigger battle?
And you're making an impact with your voice and your writing. Can you tell? And your book is great. I started reading it. It's very.
Thank you.
Where can our listeners or watchers find your book, or find you online or on social media?
Well, Amazon, thrift books, it's Atmosphere Press. Under my name, under any of the search engines, a lot comes up.
Mhm.
Other writings that I've done
I
more recently.
I will definitely link all I'll link everything in the description box of the episode so that they can find you and your book as well. And one last final question. If you could leave our listeners with one blessing, affirmation, or an invitation as they move through their week, what would it be?
My recommendation is once a day do some act of kindness.
Mm-hmm.
That will give you a different perspective on your life, no matter how painful it is. Help somebody cross a street, mail a letter for them, pick up a grocery if they can't really get out, check on them.
Mm-hmm.
Become a selfless person, even in less time than it says to do a daily workout, exercise workout. Do something per day that shifts your focus from yourself to other people or animals, and that will alter your perspective. The less self-absorbed you are, I think, the greater the possibility that you're going to heal, actually.
That's true. I believe that as well. Thank you, Blair, so much for your courage, your candor, and your invitation for people to look outside themselves, basically.
Thank you.
It's been a joy to speak to you and to reading your book. It's very insightful and something I'm really enjoying.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I hope others feel the same about it and that it helps them and helps others too. Because don't forget, you're not in isolation. You have parents that are fretting, friends, coworkers. This impacts on your teachers, anybody. They don't really know. They don't know what's going on with you and how they can help you.
That's so true. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.